Today, we're going to be looking at the Vortex Turbo Expert Advisor. So this gentleman here, Mr. Stanislav, is one of the most prolific MQL5 developers. He comes out fairly frequently with different bots, and most of them are usually a bit sketchy. So the ones that I've seen in the past, although they have lots of supporters, usually they kind of make their way to the top of the MQL5 marketplace for a few weeks, maybe a few months, but then usually something goes wrong, there's some sort of manipulation, and then it disappears and a new bot reappears within a few weeks. So based on that, I want to analyze this one, and from our preliminary backtesting, it looks less fake than some of his previous bots. However, there's still a few big risk elements here. So curious to dive in and see how exactly it works and what to expect from it. So here we can see that it's using a scalping style strategy on gold, and what's actually really refreshing about this bot is that he's saying that it uses a controlled martingale and averaging grid. So he's actually becoming increasingly honest with each release of the bots, because in some of the prior ones, he says a bunch of fluff, but you have no idea how it actually works. This one, if we run a backtest, it is running a grid martingale on gold, and he is fairly transparent about that. So that's quite interesting. He's also saying that each position is fully protected by a built-in stop loss. Most likely that's a bit odd because if you have a grid martingale, you can't have a fixed stop loss just because it doesn't work in that context of a strategy, because in a grid martingale you'd open a second position where the stop loss would be. So most likely he has some sort of equity stop loss or some sort of perhaps massive stop loss which prevents cataclysmic blowups. However, is still probably not like a true stop loss in the sense. It isn't like you have one position, one stop loss, one TP. And here we can see that, I'm trying to see if he's AI dropping a little bit here too. Volatility mapping, adaptive filtration, momentum recognition. So all of these are kind of fancy sounding words, but they can also just mean various filters. And oh, here we go. Here's some nice neural scalping intelligence. He's kind of famous for using more of the ChatGPT style and sales jargon. So there's a bit of that going on. External AI modules. So yeah, I wouldn't read too much into that. Most likely there's not too much real AI technology behind it. But frankly, many guys use this guy's bots, and people are reasonably happy with it. At least a certain percentage of the customer base is. So he can't be doing everything wrong. It is easy to kind of chalk it up and say, just fake manipulated bot. Granted, many developers in the MQL5 marketplace do that and just continuously put out crap, but they don't have the same staying power as this guy. Yes, I generally think his bots are usually not great. However, he's frequently high enough at the top of the MQL5 marketplace that they can't be complete garbage, or else nobody would continuously buy it, right? There's only so many people that you can put the wool over their eyes with, right? So there must be something to it. And if we dip through them, we can see indeed that it is running some sort of grid system. There are enormous stop losses going on, but frankly, it looks quite a bit more legitimate than some of his previous ones. I would venture that he's probably using some sort of mean reversion oscillator, because it's a more of a grid martingale style system, and those usually work in more of a mean reverting way. But the exact details we can probably map out in a few minutes. So now let's look at some of these accounts that he's running. He is indeed running a well-trade account. So this is our favorite scam broker. So I would not read too much into this. Here we have an IC Markets account, which is also running. And the good thing is it is indeed matching what we're seeing, what he's saying it is. It is a grid martingale on gold. We can see that through the equity and balanced attachment here in the equity curve. So overall, it looks to be doing what he says it's doing. And then here he says a $10,000 account. InstaForex, I'm never sure, because a lot of sketchy guys have been using this broker recently. I don't know if people are able to manipulate the signals. They are technically a semi-regulated broker, but not really. So there's no major entity, they don't have any tier 1 regulations. And I think they're on some island, but they're not absolute top tier. So maybe they're allowing these guys to play with the signals a bit. You never know. So it's just pure speculation on my end. But we do know that well-trade is absolute crap. These signals are very fake. So just one thing to note there. IC Markets, though, is obviously a fantastic broker. And so we know that this signal is indeed real. But because he's also running so many, I wouldn't be surprised if some of them go boom just throughout the course of the next few weeks and few months. So yeah, so far it's looking very much like a grid martingale with a impressive looking sales page, and the signals are quite impressive, but a lot of this stuff is also just kind of AI goop, which we can't really get too much information out of either. So I ran a backtest here on Vantage, and what we can see is that he is very much using the CCI indicator in order to make movements, and it is indeed using a grid martingale style system. And there is clearly averaging in positions. So the one kind of downside here, well, there's many downsides, but the biggest downside would be that it's looking a little bit too good to be true. If you see this kind of like running a grid martingale on gold is usually extremely risky, especially because he's running short and longs, and gold is such a volatile asset, you can rapidly blow through a grid. So I'd be very hesitant about that. And at the same time, we're only seeing these really, really small dips in the equity curve. And that usually means that this may be a heavily, heavily overfit grid martingale. If we also look at the size of the grid, like let me quickly scroll to some of these levels. This is on the M5, right? This is an absolutely tiny, tiny distance between the orders being opened. So that's not great, because it means that if there's a large spike in gold, it might open like an absolute boatload of different positions at once, which could be pretty high risk. And here we can see that it is indeed having a recovery coefficient of 2, so he is indeed doubling it every time. Okay, so here we're seeing that he does have a limit to the amount of recovery trades that you can have, which is also a pretty good sign. But I don't know why he has this set to false, like by default. Let me see quickly if I run a backtest here, if it will make much of a difference if we set it to true. Because when I looked at the deals under those default settings, it was still very much using lot size increases. Okay, it appears to be matching. Okay. It could be under here, normal risk profile. It could be overruling it here. So there is clearly a recovery filter, but there's also an equity stop loss at 10 levels. That's still a little bit risky for my personal beliefs, but perhaps it could be optimized. So overall, what I'm seeing here, guys, is a pretty basic grid martingale on gold with a CCI indicator as the trigger, likely some sort of filter. The big risk factors is anytime you run a grid martingale on gold, that's pretty high risk, just because gold can be such a volatile asset. And if we look at the actual distance between the orders being opened, and we scroll across quite a few of them here, that appears to be a bit too aggressive for what I would think would be effective. So most likely this bot has a pretty high blow up risk and is likely something which you want to stay away from. Anytime you want to run a grid martingale, there are use cases for it, and there's plenty of successful people who use it. Just I would not recommend running one on gold. And also from what I can see, there's no like AI usage here. So once again, nothing too crazy there. So guys, hope you enjoyed the video. I'd stay away from this bot if I were you, but if you do buy it, leave me a comment about your experience, because always curious to hear other people's opinions. Cheers.